Everyone, and welcome to the July edition of Payroll Question Time. I'm Steve Yardley from JJ Recruitment, and I will be your host today. It's our final PQT before the summer break, so we've got a lot to get through today. Packed stuff here. So now, since our last session, it's been a very British few weeks. We've had another new Prime Minister, hosepipe bans, a brave British run at Wimbledon that ultimately fell just short. And just to complete the set, England losing to Argentina in the World Cup again. And if that wasn't enough entertainment for you, we've still got the Farage versus Count Binface by-election to look forward to. So exciting stuff coming in the summer months. So with Parliament already gone for summer, as always, we're going to spend the next 90 minutes looking at the payroll changes that definitely won't be taking a holiday. For anyone joining us for the first time, Payroll Question Time brings together a group of payroll experts to discuss the latest legislation, the practical changes and the challenges, and what they mean for payroll teams and employers around the country. As always, the most important thing is your questions. Please keep popping them through. We have an excellent panel of experts here. The most important thing is that we're talking to you guys directly and answering your questions. So those questions through, guys. So onto the boring bit, a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded and the slides will be shared afterwards. So if you miss anything, that's fine, they'll be shared at the end. We will also be sharing at the end the HR and Payroll Pulse Research Survey 2026. It's from Worx, and that will be available to download at the end of today's session. It is one of the largest HR and payroll research projects in Europe, and it contains some excellent insight around workforce planning, payroll reliability, AI, employee experience, and pay transparency. So definitely worth a click and a download at the end. And as always, as I have to say, today's discussion is guidance and opinion only. So from my side, over the past month, I've done a couple of live payroll events. And the one thing that's been remarkably consistent is wherever I go, the questions are the same. Payroll benefit in kinds, fair work agency, salary sacrifice, and our friends, the HMRC. So seems sensible to cover all of that in today's session. We'll be cutting through the noise, sharing practical insight from our panel and helping you understand what these developments mean in practice. So without further ado, let's move on to our wonderful panel of experts. First up, Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance at Worx. Welcome, Simon.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you and tackle some of these challenges. We've got quite a lot to do before April next year, and it's great to, well, I've got a new panelist with us today. So, there's a lot going on in government. So, yes, I've been in the industry now for, well, I joined Centerfile, it was the predecessor of Worx in 1984. So it just seems impossible, doesn't it? I am a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals, and I have the MSc Payroll Management as part of the first cohort that went through the Master of Science. But it's great to be here, Steve.
Thank you, Simon. Welcome. Next up, Richard George, Senior Payroll Manager at MHA. Richard, welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon. It has been a couple of months of change for many reasons, me included. So now I am Senior Payroll Manager, as said, at MHA. So back into the world of payroll for me, managing a very large bureau function within the UK. So exciting and challenging, best way to describe it. But my history is all aspects of payroll for the last 40 years, whether it be education, client relationship, or in-house. Like many here, member of the Reward 300, and looking forward to today.
Thank you, Richard. Congrats on the new role. And moving forward, Matthew Akrig, Policy and Advisory Lead at CIPP. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, I've recently come back to the CIPP as the Policy and Advisory Lead following a short secondment into HMRC, where I was assisting with the Mandatory Payroll and Benefits project. Richard sort of just alluded to, I'm sort of very pleased to say that this year I was included in the Reward 300, which was fantastic to hear. That was lovely. I've always had to sit here letting everyone else read out their credentials as we go through the panel, not being part of the Reward 300, but no longer this year I'm part of it. So thank you very much.
Congratulations, well done, well deserved. And we've brought in a specialist off the bench. Amazing. Jenny Morris. Welcome, Jenny, of Minimum Wage Specialist. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Jenny, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, so newbie here, so you've all got to be nice and kind to me. So yeah, I've also been a member of the Reward 300, so it sits alongside my Blue Peter badge now. Those are my 2 accolades that I've got so far in life. NMW specialist, new consultancy, set that up about 12 months ago now. Before then, I worked historically in HMRC, so I was on their national minimum wage team for a number of years, and then I headed up EY's national minimum wage team for about 8 years. So as you can tell, I am that NMW geek. So anything around that aspect, please send your questions in to me.
Fabulous. Fabulous to have you on here. Thank you, Jenny. As always, it's a brilliant mix, payroll operations, compliance, policy. So please, guys, do make the most of them. When I've stopped talking for a bit, I'll check on the chat and make sure we've got the questions coming through and that I can get them to these guys. So thank you so much, guys. So moving to the first topic, let's begin with what continues to be one of the biggest payroll topics at the moment, the mandatory payrolling of benefits in kind. I don't know if we've got onto the slide yet, but I know the topics that we were talking about were tax administration day announcements, the draft legislation release, mandation confirmed, more clarity around Class 1A, and a clearer indication of the implementation timetable. I know this thing, like we write these notes and then by the time we get here, something's changed. So I don't know who wants to take a lead on this one. If we could flip through to the slide, it would be good. But let's start. I don't know who wants to start.
Me or you, Simon?
Don't mind. You go, Matthew.
Well, I'll kick us off. So I think for a long time now, I think we've been sat here talking about mandatory payrolling of benefits, with needing to be very careful with our tongues, because we have been having the conversations with HMRC behind the scenes with regards to the implementation and the rollout of the new rules. Now, we have now had confirmed that the mandation is coming in from April 2027, but we've got a phased approach. So we're seeing cars and car fuel, vans and van fuel, and medical benefits being mandated from April 2027, with the remaining benefits all to be brought in April 2028. But you can, of course, as you always have been able to do, voluntarily payroll those from April 27 if you wish, with the exception of the loans and accommodation, which there are still things being worked out there. We've had legislation day, which has brought us some draft legislation for us to sink our teeth into. So do take a look at that, but we are still expecting some further guidance to be released. We were expecting that in July. It is now the very end of July, and I don't think we have that extra guidance yet. So hopefully we will receive that very soon. But sometimes the timetables get a little skewed, and I suppose with potential changes of ministers, there may have been some delays there with getting things pushed through a ministerial sign-off. I know the XST has remained in position, so the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, who is the key minister for HMRC, has remained in their post. So that is a blessing, if you will, in terms of the continuity of this piece of legislation, because we don't have a new minister coming in with new priorities and new feelings on the legislation as it's progressing. So I think from a timetable point of view, as we look to that sort of probable timetable, I would expect things to continue progressing as they have been previously. So I suppose that's a good place to start. Any thoughts on the legislation that's been released itself, Simon?
Well, should we clarify which ones they are and start going there? But I think it's all fine. As you're saying, Matthew, I think we were told that the original guidance would be issued by the end of July. We've got another day, and if it goes in COVID announcement fashion, it'll be about 6 or 7 o'clock tomorrow night. However, I think there was an indication earlier the week because Matthew and I have been on some of the consultation meetings this week. We've got to be careful what we say to a certain extent, but I think they're indicating it would be next week that it would be released. But so everybody's aware, mandation applies to cars and fuel, vans and fuel, and medical benefits. You probably mentioned that at the beginning, but I missed it. And nothing else. So everything else is voluntary. What that means, though, is there is separation in the mandatory items in the reporting. So all of us that have been doing voluntary payrolling since 2016, when it was brought in following the Office for Tax Simplification proposals, they were proposed in 2014, adopted in 16, and then car reporting came in voluntary in 17 and mandatory in 18 if you were voluntary. It's slightly different. The voluntary group will be similar, but the mandatory group, there may well be more information to report. Now, I was just thinking, Matthew, I'm kind of gone into detail here, so forgive me, and I'm sure the group will bring me back. There's an element of, well, what does that mean? We find lots struggle, for example, with the car reporting, and the interactions with clients at the moment is thinking, well, mandatory payrolling, that means we give you P11D data earlier, don't we? And there's an element of payroll wants to know the amount to tax. He doesn't want the P11D data. He wants to know how much you want taxed in payroll, evenly spread across the life of the benefit. And then there's car reporting, which is separate and aligns a little bit with the amount being taxed, but may be different. But at the moment, Matthew, I'm thinking from the proposal we're seeing, people will say, well, we already report the car data under voluntary arrangements, isn't it the same? And the reality is at the moment, it looks as if it might not be, because there may be 4 new data items. I think we're part of a task force of external and internal with HMRC are resisting that, asking what on earth do you need this for? But at the moment, they're indicating it because they're wanting data to check the compliance and accuracy. But we'll see where it goes. But the additional data they're after is, surprisingly, engine size, CC of the car. You think, well, isn't that already reported? Well, no, it's not. And then it goes into other items such as price of accessories not included in the price of the car. Well, isn't that already in the benefit value? Yes, it is. Capital contributions made by the employees towards the cost of car or accessories. Well, that's already in the benefit value amount. Yes, it is. But they want it separate. And the amount paid by employees towards private use of car. So those sorts of things come in, but they all affect the benefit value. So as an element of why, they'll argue to a certain extent that that's so that they can, and my lads use the term, I'm sure Jenny will use the term a lot later, police the data that's being input so they can check that what you're doing is right. Because I suspect that a lot of the car data they're getting now under voluntary is a little strange and not always aligned with what they expect. And so they're after more granular information so they can deal with it. And then we'll have similar for, go on.
I was going to say, Simon, you can certainly understand why.
Yes.
More so on the grounds of, as you say, it's policing, because if you're no longer doing a P11D and therefore not complying with information on cars, what's to say that you're actually reporting the car the individual's got?
Well, exactly. And the challenge I think we see in the voluntary world, and so it's an element of where we've got to gear up into the new world, is to think that with P11Ds, we're reporting what's happened in the past. With payrolling, we're not. We're reporting what's going to happen in the future. Oh, and if it just happens to change, you then adjust it along the journey. And I think the difficulty many employers have probably experienced is not realizing that they have to adjust it along the journey because they thought it was a one-off activity and we're all done. where absolutely someone's crashed their car or changed it or been sacked or made redundant, they don't have a car anymore. So the prediction of the benefit up to April next year, now that they're leaving in October, needs to be brought back down. And so they may well do that for the payroll activity, but they've forgotten they have to do that on the car reporting as well. So it's going to be an interesting time. So there's an element of get your projects going. So that mandation is confirmed: cars, vans, associated fuel with both of those, and medical insurance. The rest are all voluntary, and we'll have common things that are voluntary payroll now, such as, well, one I can think of that's most common that I see is gym membership fees. So things like that that come in. Others tend to be more obscure. Matthew knows that whenever I'm at an HMRC meeting, I mention things in jest to them about requirements for neighbours' dog's DNA sample, timeshares, planes, and precious metals, which was part of the original, or apart from the dog's DNA sample, that wasn't, I just made that one up, but was all part of the original draft fields that were announced by HMRC as being required for next year. And magically, was it about 120 of them have been dropped and gone? But we'll have to see what happens in April 28.
No, sort of. Go on, Matthew.
Go on, Richard.
No, I was going to go off to another part of this. So carry on, Matthew.
It's fine. I was going to say from an operational standpoint, just to sort of like think about what can you do now, how can people prepare. I think what we're going to be seeing is a much larger shift from your sort of reward and benefits employees, whoever has the sort of responsibility and remit for that, having to work much more closely with the pay departments, if that is sort of an internal process. Obviously, for external outsourced payroll provision, there's going to be a lot more complications here in terms of the sort of inflow of data. So I suppose where people need to prep now is to understand where the flow of data is coming into your organization from third parties, namely sort of the provision of cars, the leases. What information do you need to get from them? How fast are you getting that information from them? And how fast are you transferring that internally? The structure of the legislation and the structure of the guidance is such that you should not necessarily be penalized for the delays of the flow of information through your business, provided that that is a reasonable amount of time to be updating those figures. Now, as with anything legislation and HMRC wise, reasonable is open to interpretation, and HMRC's version of reasonable might be different to your version of reasonable, but you do obviously need to make sure that you're doing what you can within your power to ensure that that data is flowing through at a pace that means that you can update the correct tax position within the payroll. The ultimate aim of this policy is to make sure that the employees are taxed as correct as possible, as close to the time of them receiving the benefit. So that's what you should always have in mind when sort of building the policies around this.
I think I was going to say, I can now obviously see this from the bureau side. Now working for an accounting firm where the payroll has nothing to do with the P11D, the education piece is possibly the biggest challenge. So it's how do you market the change? How do you communicate the change, not only internally, possibly because of your current model, but obviously to your clients as well? Because historically, they may be speaking to a tax expert or a compliance expert who would have given them a timeline to deliver for July. And all of a sudden now we've got this transitional change, and obviously the guys have already spoken about trying to effectively create a real-time reporting solution to the payroll that gives the, I guess, employee the opportunity to be taxed correctly through the year. From the legislation updates that recently came out, they're obviously now explaining probably more thoroughly than before around what's going to happen if you don't know the information. So it could literally be transposing the previous year's figures to this year to get a rough estimate, and then correcting as the information is known. And you're expecting year one, especially that April to July period is probably going to be more used than possibly as the future and people get used to it. Because remember, the last payroll of the year is not necessarily going to be the end of the process, but it's the last opportunity that you have to deduct tax. So the principal position, and it's stated very clearly in the update, is, you know, you will continue to adjust to make it real time as possible by what would have been the P11D date, but then possibly creating P800 reporting to the employee for the under deducted tax. So it's about how your strategy internally is going to effectively manage real time, how your strategy externally is going to be communicating with your clients as to the reporting and the numbers that you're going to be getting. And then the third strategy, I guess, is how effective can your real time be? And then how are you going to communicate that to the individuals? Because if you're guesstimating, using that wonderful payroll expression, from April to March, they need to be aware that what you've deducted might not even be close to the real figure. So I think there is an enormous level of internal consideration, as well as understanding the legislation, which we've already spoken about.
So I think the initial sort of need, I'd suggest to our listeners, of what do you need to do to prepare, identify what benefits you have and what their status is. Are they subject to tax? Are they subject to class 1, because some benefits are? Are they going to be subject to the new class 1A? Now, some may say we've had class 1A for ages in payroll. Not for benefits, you haven't. That's going to be completely new. I guess we'll go on to that. So what benefits do you have? Then there's another angle, and this might start to bring Jenny into some of the discussions, is are you operating OPRA? So benefits can quite often be operated by OPRA arrangements or optional remuneration arrangements, salary sacrifice. Now, the reporting of those and operation in payroll may be slightly different because quite often they're operated as negatives. So you have to consider how that is. So what pay elements do you need in payroll? And then there's separate how you're going to report the benefit items of extra data. That you can think about now. I have cars, I have medical insurance, I need to sort those out. Oh, the cars has a benefit charge to it. That's going to be, I don't know, electric vehicle 5%. So I need to work out what the benefit charge is and apply that to payroll as a non-payable element, which is subject to tax and subject to the new class 1A. Oh, I've got medical insurance, that's going to be subject to tax, it's going to be subject to class 1A. What do you do about spouse? Family extensions. Oh, we deduct that from their pay before tax through salary sacrifice or after tax. Oh, so not through salary sacrifice. There's all those sorts of implications from a payroll configuration aspect that you can plan now. Don't worry too much about the data reporting aspect because we don't know what that is yet because they're not issuing the specification until, from memory, I'm going to say October, Matthew, but certainly not to the end of September, October. So they actually haven't
October, November,
issue.
I think, was maybe discussed.
Correct, which means we don't actually know what the FPS will look like. What we do know, though, is what we need to start preparing for when we do know what's actually going on in the FPS reporting. It's just a thought. Steve, sorry, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, sorry, was someone phoning me, but there's questions coming through, and there's also kind of statements of where people are as well. So, so I think it's quite interesting. First one: when can companies register voluntary benefits for April 27 with HMRC?
So at the moment, the voluntary service is closed because they expected that we would no longer have the voluntary process, but then now we've decided to phase. I believe the voluntary service is scheduled to reopen later in the year. I want to say September, but keep an eye out for updates because there will be an announcement on the registration process, and that may come with some other updates as well.
So we get a number of dates announced, Steve. One of them is November that we've heard in the past, so we'll have to see as well. But towards the end of this year, they'll open the registration for the voluntary.
And is this part of the course? Is this because Starmer's gone, we've got Burnham, or is this just the way it is?
I think it's got nothing to do with it, to be honest.
Nothing to do with that. No, I think
Yeah.
the fact that the voluntary service was shuttered was because we didn't expect it to be a phased approach, but now we've got a phased approach. It needs to be reopened, and as is everything civil service wise, everything needs to be reassessed and sort of put through all the IT systems. They've got a huge amount of systems in the background, so they needed to sort of probably reassess how that fit into the overall landscape of payrolling. So yeah, unfortunately it wasn't just to turn it off and on again.
Yeah, because we bid and have been successful with the central government executive recruitment, so it's going to be my world soon. So it's good to know. Thank you. We had an update here. We went live payrolling BICs in April 25, and a year on, it's one of the most complex tasks we've had to complete. However, the translation of what we're reporting to HMRC to the employers is probably the most difficult part of it. I think it's just a statement of where they're at. So
yeah, I can get that. I mean, it's if you have multiple benefits under multiple schemes, so it could even be medical. You could have medical, dental, the list could go on, which all, for all intents and purposes, form one element, but you've got to show them separately. So I think, again, it's just another key strategy is what does the pay slip look like? Because remember, by the June, as it stands, you have to report payrolled items of benefit. How do you alleviate separate reporting requirements through good use of pay slips, for instance? Because they've got to get the data. They've got to know what the cash equivalents are of each item they have. Now, as you say, by June, you are expected to report that to the individual. And if you can, actively use the pay slip to be that report, then brilliant.
Done.
But you could end up with a lovely long pay slip, which nobody likes when we hit page 2. That could actually be more complicated to the individual than giving them something separate. So again, it's how are you going to manage this? How are you going to communicate it? And giving the staff the opportunity to understand what it's going to look like and possibly come back and ask you questions. Because people are like that. They have a habit of questioning.
My experience, Stephen, is possibly a little bit the opposite, but it'd be interesting to explore some of that. I mean, I've been payrolling now for 2016 for ourselves and our staff, and I'll have a number of benefits, medical being one of them, and dental. I just get a pay slip that shows medical with the value, dental with the value, and that's the amount that's taxed. That fulfills the reporting requirement. Sometimes there's a view that, well, we need this stuff for a self-assessment. Well, because it's payrolled, you don't, because it's already included in your taxable gross value, whereas before it wasn't. So there is a different regime, but it's interesting to see and understand. But I think we struggle sometimes to transition from an old world to a new. And I think one of the fundamentals of mandatory payrolling benefits in kind is it isn't a lift and drop of P11D. It might look similar, but it's not the same. Plus, the other aspect is P11D reported by benefits in a tax year specific to quite often when the cost was incurred, whereas with payrolling, it spreads it through the life of the benefit. So, so you can have a bit this year and a bit next year, and it just spreads it, flattens it, which is a different world. Now, lots of people are saying they were doing that on P11D, They may well have been doing that on P11D. That isn't actually what the P11D instructions say to do, but some people did and some people didn't. And I've had that sort of arguments a little bit with some of the policy people, because they're kind of saying, well, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's sort of, your guidance says, and that's on the value of or the cost of medical insurance to the employer. So we've got employers that are splitting it for the life on their P11D. It's not what the CWG5 says, or the 480. Not what it says. It doesn't necessarily say you can't. It doesn't say you can.
Thank you. Next up, we have been payrolling our cars since April 2020 and sending all the required data on the FPS. Surely we continue without any changes?
Yeah, unfortunately, I would hope is my response to that. And Matthew knows my view is I don't see any reason for anything to change. However, HMRC are proposing a change. So and at the moment, if they don't change that position, it will change from April 27.
I guess there's a positive that the P46 car form will go. So
Yes.
there's a win.
Well,
Just every cloud.
And just as I think, in addition to that, I think Simon, you've raised with HMRC some sort of potential issues with the car reporting process, and it is something that further conversations are happening, although those are kind of separate to the payrolling BICS conversation. But just, there are things going on in that space as well. So there is potential that in the future you could see further change in that area.
yes. Yeah,
And
I've
I
been a
think
bit critical.
sorry, Simon, go.
Yeah, I've been a bit critical of the current process because, in effect, you're giving a new car to every employee on the 6th of April every year. And in our mind, our instinct is not. The other aspect is if I give them a car on the 4th of April, the reporting to HMRC only allows me to tell them that they had it from the 6th. And equally, if I'm taking a car off them from the 7th of April, after the close of the year, the latest date I can currently report is the 5th. And there's an element of, why the thump do that? Because I'm collecting the tax in March, the car's coming off them, it just doesn't align with a real-time calculation process. So Matthew will know that I'm always beating on about that mandation of payrolling shouldn't be a transfer of a paper form process. We should get into a real world, real-time generated futuristic product. And we'll see where we go. I think we're making some ground.
Yeah, and I think cards is one of the key factors here. Unfortunately, as Simon quite rightly said, people are not given a car on the 6th of April and give it back on the 5th the following year. People do not necessarily give their cars back the day they leave. People are not that good at driving. So it could be a scenario where a car is damaged, but the individual still has the car because it's repairable, but they're not using it. It could be the scenario that they've crashed it properly and it's no longer theirs, but it's taken the insurance company X number of months to decide. And therefore, you're going to have all of these, I guess, flexibilities is a good way of describing it, or adjustments that are continually going to be happening, which are not necessarily going to be in real time, including, as we mentioned, after the April date, when you find out that there were 7 car changes that happened in February that nobody told you about. So there's, I think, a number of very, very important areas that you've really got to square away as much as you can. And really, I guess you'd hope that the companies providing you the data, so the octopuses and the whoever it may be of the world, are actually on top of this themselves and have considered what they're going to have to do going forward to support you.
That's
And
a
I
good
haven't
point,
heard
personally,
personally.
Richard. Are you enjoying working in bureau again?
Living the dream. But I think it's more the case of, have you spoken to your provider?
Mm-hmm.
Is a great question. And what are they going to do and how are they going to change? So
Matthew and I know that HMRC is starting to engage with providers
Which
but
is
they may
nice.
be in for a bit of a shock of what they need to do. But I just thought I'm thinking increasingly car schemes, as the questions are relating to that are operating quite often in payroll world are because of the introduction of salary sacrifice EV schemes. And I don't know. I don't know if Jenny, you want to make any comment about that sort of thing, because that sort of then starts to touch your world. Because yeah,
It certainly does. Salary sacrifice is always the one where NMW that everyone's going, wow, it's voluntary. I chose to have this. It shouldn't reduce me NMW pay. But we all know anything around salary sacrifice, that reduction will impact your national minimum wage pay, no matter whether it was chosen, not chosen, whatever. It really, really has a massive impact in it. And we're still seeing errors like this cropping up all the time with businesses. I mean, you see it all the time as well, don't you, Simon?
oh, you certainly
One
do.
of your top ones, I would think, salary sacrifice.
Well, yeah, you know, it's been one of my specialists for many years. I think that's we introduced you to the GPA all those years ago as well. But I think lots of people think that salary sacrifice schemes are not company cars. They are.
Yeah, they are. Holiday pay, you get company cars, you get everything within the whole spectrum of it.
Yeah, and I think if you remember a few months ago, we spoke about my scenario that I had, you know, where people aren't necessarily offsetting against the right areas. So, you know, as we've spoken about, if you come on this regularly, the salary sacrifice has to be taken from the pay being considered for national minimum wage. And that is fundamental. So if you offer somebody a car allowance, give them the car allowance, and then give them the option for a salary sacrifice EV, you aren't offsetting that against the car allowance.
No, because allowances don't count for national minimum wage purposes.
But
So,
people will,
so you're losing out.
people will try. It's
So,
very
yeah. So should we let that one sink in a bit? So if you gave someone a £200 car allowance and you allowed them to take out a £200 lease via a salary sacrifice scheme, and you only pay them £1,000, you haven't got you haven't got £1,000 and £200 car allowance. They've now reduced the car allowance to zero. They've still got £200 car allowance. They've reduced their income earnings subject to national minimum wage by the £200 because the regulations do that. And in our head, we'll go, well, they just spent the 200 quid I gave them for a car. They haven't,
No,
not
it's
according to
totally the
NMW
structure.
regs.
Absolutely, it's the structure of looking at everything. So where you're looking at tax codes and where you're looking at the pay elements and codes with things, you need to make sure that A, does it count for national minimum wage? So a pay elements and deductions review every now and again is vital with this.
It's one of my favourites because people, when I speak, people say, does somebody really do that? And the answer is absolutely. I can give you two.
I think we've done a good stick of this one, but I just wanted one question myself, right? We're off for a month. Like, so how much do you think this landscape is going to have changed by the time we come back in September?
Well, my prediction is not a lot. We may know a little bit more detail of what the technical side will look like, but the principle of what's going to be payrolled is going to be cars, vans, and medical. And so there is an element of start identifying them. Equally, there's an element of identify your other benefit types if you're wanting to voluntary payroll them. And there's an aspect we haven't covered here because it's likely that anything you payroll will be subject to the new real-time Class 1A calculation. Subject to confirmation, but that will at least apply to the mandatory. It's likely to apply to anything you payroll. So there'll be a 15% employer national insurance charge applicable from April, which you've usually been used to paying every July after the close of tax year. So you'll have Class 1A starting in April, May, June, and in July you'll get a monthly bill to pay, plus the prior 12-month bill for the prior tax year. So it's just working that out. And it's all to come, all to be clarified. I think we can prepare. We don't need to wait to prepare, but
So-
don't focus on the data so much as the principle of what it is you have.
So do you think they are going to actively make voluntarily payrolls go to Class 1A in real time? Because they were speaking obviously about still having the P11D process for those voluntaries.
Yes, so but the voluntaries are if they don't payroll them, Richard. If they payroll them, I think we'll find there'll be a
Okay.
Class 1A
No,
charge.
it wasn't an argument, it was an open question.
Yes, no, that's fair enough. But you don't have to payroll voluntary.
Oh no, of course not. Absolutely not.
Yes. But we'll see. I think, if I'm honest about it, I think that's the plea of the software industry, is that they just do it. Otherwise, you're having to build two separate calculation systems, and it's an element to just get on with it, because then we'd have to change it again in April 28th.
And it'd be very interesting, I think, to see the direction that a lot of bureaus take around that voluntary. You know, are they going to drive to it, given, and I'm sorry if I'm being devil's avocado, but there's more money to them in a P11D?
Yeah. Now, well, that's an interesting point, Richard. Should there be? So it's interesting that a P11D processor is considered, be careful what I say here, superior to a payroll process that will now be doing the same thing every month. Should it be that they're equal? I don't know, just putting that out there.
Well, I think the other thing is you're going to get an expectation from a client that this isn't chargeable.
Yeah, it's interesting, that one.
The payroll process.
But you do charge for your payrolls, don't you, Richard? If not, we'll send everyone to your way.
But it's very good value, Simon. Trust me.
I'm trying to figure out how all these solicitors have Porsches, etc., and Lamborghinis driving around, etc., for big practices when legislation is free.
But I think that whole dynamic is quite key. I mean, yes. I haven't seen anyone talking about cost, because obviously the final decision of what it's going to look like is still not there.
Yes.
But you know, are they going to replicate the costs? Are they going to make it more expensive because it's now done 12 times or possibly 52 times a year rather than once? And given it's a different demographic possibly delivering the process, how does that affect the balance of cost on it?
Sure, exactly. But I think that the statement that payroll legislation is free is false. You pay for it in your service fees.
More questions?
Otherwise, they're not charities, these software developers. And Jenny, I think if you're doing NMW, you say that, well, all they're doing is complying with the law. Do you do it all for free for them?
Not at the moment, no. It's all there. They can go and have a look. I can point them in the direction of it. It's that interpretation of it, like we know, is taking the time.
Yes. So if there's extra resource and time needed to do activity, it's going to increase the cost base, and then you're going to have to add your margin, aren't you? Otherwise, your business is going down the pan.
I think to your solicitor's point, Simon, there's a bit, you know, with AI now, like there's basic legal stuff that you can go through, contracts and things like that. However, we recently had a tripartite agreement, and it was like, as soon as we saw that, it was like, let's get that. You phone the solicitor, you know when to actually do it. Property stuff like that. I think it's probably where we're at. More questions. I have a client who literally only yesterday has included all of their allowances in their national minimum wage calculation. Shall I recommend not to include them?
You first of all need to make sure that they are not consolidated into pay. So allowances on the face of it might look okay. So if it's a fixed allowance, like the car allowance Simon was talking about before, and it's a fixed amount that doesn't fluctuate with the base pay that they get, it will be an allowance and it won't count. However, if it's consolidated into pay and increases at the same rate and other aspects of your base pay, then it could be considered consolidated and it might count. So go and have a look at the allowances. Are they fixed or are they consolidated?
Thank you ever so much. You're clearly in demand, because next one,
God.
in
I knew it was a good
a
idea having her on,
yeah,
Simon.
Or we could join in.
Yeah, okay.
in a national minimum wage audit I was involved in, I was led to believe that things such as C2W was being considered for exclusion from the national minimum wage calculation. Given that C2W is a huge benefit to employers, is this still the case?
I heard that sector to work. It's covered to the salary sacrifice. Will still be under that salary sacrifice umbrella that we spoke about earlier, that will reduce national minimum wage pay.
Yeah, it's often a plea to the relevant minister, but the ministers so far have not been minded to change it.
No.
Would they at
And
some
I think we've got
future
plenty
point?
other things on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
On their
Would they
minds. I
at
mean,
some-
we're still battling with pension salary sacrifice and other things with that. So I mean, the cycle to work. It's not something in the conversations I've been privy to. They've taken an interest
and I was going
in.
to say that pension side is the thing that I think we are more concerned about. But realistically, the things that are covered under the opera exemptions, like there's an argument you could make potentially with the exception of the EV vehicles, that those are beneficial things for low paid workers to be able to utilize the benefits of salary sacrifice there. So I think there's always a conversation that's to be had. Potentially it's just waiting for the right minister that wants to listen to those conversations.
Yeah, we've
And you
passed
haven't
it a
got
few
one at the minute.
times.
Nice to be in demand, Jenny. So, are we moving forward now, guys, to the Fair Work Agency? I think that's our next. We've given it a good old stick on time on that. I think it's great. There's some great questions and some real interaction this week, but do keep them coming through, guys. And yeah, on to the next slide. I don't know if anyone who wants to take a lead on this. It gathers momentum, and where are we at the moment? Looking at the 0 hours. I think it was the 0 hours piece we were really going to talk about, wasn't it? But...
Yeah, I can dive into the 0 hours consultation document and then sort of hand over to sort of take us through the sort of remainder of the Fair Work Agency stuff. The 0 hours consultation is looking at 3 separate things. So it is the trigger point at which point someone should be eligible for a contract of employment with a set number of hours. So basically, once someone reaches a certain threshold, they should then be offered a contract that reflects the number of hours that they actually work. The right to reasonable notice of shifts and shift curtailment, and the potential for a payment where shifts are cancelled or curtailed at short notice. So those are the 3 main areas of the consultation. Obviously, from a sort of pay and HR standpoint, some of those things are really important with how you engage with staff and how you deal with their contracts. I think the sort of primary thing that CIPP wants to sort of really dive into is the treatment of those payments for curtailed shifts. Obviously, it's going to be a payment. It is technically then earnings, but there are no hours attributable to it. So there's probably something for Jenny to definitely sink her teeth into with regards to national minimum wage. How is that treated? How is it sort of factored in? Those sort of things. Indeed. We're still waiting on additional information on. Because I think we haven't really got the sort of meat to the bones of these proposals yet. We've kind of just sort of going through this consultation, almost a call for evidence, almost in sort of seeing where people's opinions are on those different items as to how they will be put into force for employers to deal with. I suppose just on the face of it, I think it is going to be in some regards fairly onerous for some employers to keep on top of this. You're going to have to track number of hours that people are doing on 0 hour contracts. You're going to have to track, when shifts are offered to them, when shifts are retracted, cancelled, like time and attendance systems. And so maybe not time and attendance systems. I don't know what you would call the sort of like the shift offering system, the whatever systems you've got in place for your tracking of shifts is going to have to be upscaled so much to sort of keep up with the volume of data that you need to collect on this to be able to ascertain whether you're meeting your obligations. And I suppose that kind of does sort of follow down there with your sort of holiday pay record keeping. I think in general, the Employment Rights Act is putting so much more of an onus on employers to keep track of the hours that are worked and what is paid for every single day that worker works. So really making sure that your systems that track all of these things are really up to snuff so that you can make the appropriate calculations.
I think it was quite key as well, reading the consultation. Firstly, the number of questions in it are excessive. Remembering also that this is not just for employees, it's for agency staff, and they're asking the questions twice. They're asking the questions for employees or workers, and they're asking the same questions on agency workers. And we're looking at areas as well, such as how long the average period's going to be for actually calculating. We could be looking at 8 weeks, we could be looking at 52, looking at the options that HMRC, even though they have thankfully a view towards the earlier or the shorter periods, but quite importantly, what I took from it as well was the requirement of the employer. So not only is it going to be pretty much totally down to the employer to proactively be reviewing this for an individual during that initial period, but then also it will need to continue. So even once that first decision is made, it is the requirement of the employer to, and again, this was another question as to how long that next relevant period should be before they have to actually so it's almost like re-enrollment, if that makes sense.
That's 100% what I was going to say, Richard. It's like the re-enrollment for pensions.
We're on one page, Matthew. So all of a sudden you've got this, if you have a large, I guess, casual stroke part-time workforce, I'm thinking even down to Christmas temps in retail who stay longer than 5 weeks or 8 weeks, which is more than likely in the big retailers, that suddenly there is this requirement for the employer to be incredibly proactive, as I say, not only at the first point of reference, but those follow-on reference periods, which could be every 8 to 12 weeks after that. So I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye.
So I think it's worth looking at seriously and responding with your views on what you feel it's asking. And there's a little bit of a misnomer because it says 0 hours, but when you read into the consultation, it talks about low hours as well. And I think it's sort of hinting that the low hours could be anybody with contracted hours under 12, but I think it then asks what you think it should be. So it's not necessarily purely 0 hours, it's low hours as well. So some employers have got rid of their 0 hours by offering 5 hours a week. Well, 5 hours would be potentially below the threshold, and you may have to offer more hours. But then it reaches a threshold and it asks you your views what that threshold should be, where you don't have to, you know, because there's certain times a year, certainly going back some years ago when I was heavy into development of software, where I might have been working 60 hours a week, but only normally doing 35. Does that mean they have to offer me 60 hours in the way the consultation is laid out? No, they wouldn't. But if I was contracted to 5 when I was working 25 hours a week or 60 hours a week, they might have to considerably offer or up my contracted offer. But there is implication that they don't have to accept it. But if they don't accept it, I think it's like it's kind of ongoing assessment, isn't it? Or trying your enrollment type. It's like the pension activity is, well, they've said no, you now have to reassess them and offer again and offer again. Now, initially when it was announced, it was almost probably assumed on my part incorrectly that it was a right for people to ask if they were doing it. This isn't a right about asking. This is an obligation to offer that it's talking about. But I think there's other elements. I think the indication from early discussions, for example, and this is where Jenny may have her ear to the ground, etc., is of course the short shift cancellation payment isn't earnings for national minimum wage purposes. So if you're
No, that's
offering
what.
it in a cycle to work scheme, you can't reduce that to pay for it.
Yeah, that was a great point that Matt brought up earlier. So if you think of the 0 hours contract, they're invariably going to be, remember, for NMW purposes, there's only 4 work categories. So for a 0 hours, they're probably going to be a time worker, which means you're only going to include the actual hours they work. So you do need to keep a good T&A system of that. But from there also, you're only paid for the time you are working, and it's a payment for non-working time. So therefore, it won't count. So there's a whole element of where the NMW calculations are going to look slightly differently.
And then there's an overlap with holiday pay rights. So if you're on rolled up holiday pay schemes, the 1207% is meant to be on all pay. Does it include cancellation shifts payments as well? So you've got to pay 1207% on top. Those are all sorts of the areas that need clarification. I think we can all guess quite accurately, probably, where it will land. But I think there's an amount of make your view. I think it has 4 weeks left, doesn't it, Matthew? Is it end of August,
25th?
25th of August. So it's an element of read it and respond. You can respond online, I think.
Yeah, I think there are a number of scenarios here outside of just your day-to-day. And I mentioned temps. I would say retail and hospitality, especially at peaks, whether it be the summer or whether it be Christmas, will be employing 0 hour groups, possibly doubling, trebling their workforce for possibly longer than the final decided relevant period. So this could all become viable for a group of people who might not even work for you 2 weeks after the relevant period has finished, because you've got a contract up to a certain point in time. But under the legislation and under the decided figures, could well bring these people in, I'd suggest.
Yeah. Now the consultation tries to cover that a little bit, doesn't it? Because it's asking for views on exempted groups, I think, or exceptions.
But
it's
if you have
84 pages.
Where do you draw the line though on a temp? If they are with you for 10 weeks, or if they are with you for 18 weeks or 20 weeks.
Yeah.
I think
it's thinking about those sort of like second order impacts, isn't it? Where you set the triggers will change behavior with employers. So if you exclude fixed term contracts, you will probably see a lot more fixed term contracts being utilized across different areas. One of the things that really stuck out to me, and it kind of is sort of like a merging of two separate things, is that if you set the trigger for the obligation to offer a contract with set hours on it earlier than the trigger point for your unfair dismissal protections, are you going to see people essentially dismiss people when they exercise their right to that contract? So in my opinion, I think potentially that trigger point should be set at the same time, so that you essentially have gone past that point where you can sort of not use retribution essentially to sort of penalize someone for exercising their statutory rights. And those are the sort of things that need to sort of look at the whole of like the Employment Rights Act changes as a sort of holistic solution, rather than just each bit in individuality.
So all good stuff, this. The other angle, I think, there's just on one of the headings there, Steve, it's got holiday pay record keeping. Holiday pay record keeping, lots of people I talk to think that's something to do with payroll, whereas absolutely it's something to do with entitlement rules, not pay. It's not about pay, it's about how are you proving that you've met regulation 13, 13A, is it 16 and 17 or 15 and 16?
15.
Yeah, 15 and 16. So it's an element of how you fulfilling your obligations. And I don't know, and I'm probably going to tie into Jenny here and see what she's got a view, because I hear on the grapevine that NMW audits asking questions.
I have heard a few investigators start asking about this, probably in the disguise of they're looking at worker categories. How do you work out certain worker categories? Tell me how you do your pay calculations. How do you do your holiday pay calculations? But obviously, in my experience, it can be seen as a fishing exercise a little bit as to whether they're getting all the ducks in a row for when they join the Fair Work Agency next year. I know the NMW team and Fair Work Agency are working closely together already, even though the enforcement activity is still under HMRC currently. But I have been involved in a few where the compliance officers asking about holiday records, bringing it in under toil as well, because there's a toil obligation to keep toil records for a 6-year period. Toil comes into play with T&A when you're looking at NMW calculations as well, whether they've worked excess hours for salaried employees, if they've done extra hours above the contracted hours. So it's all a little bit muddy, but they are talking about it. And this is for everyone. You talked about time and attendance, Matt, and you talked about, you know, keeping certain records. And this is for everyone. You must be able to demonstrate how many hours people have worked. Now, whether that's salaried, whether that's your 0 hours contract, whether that is your executives on 100,000 a year, the employer must be able to demonstrate the hours, because that feeds into the NMW calculation. And this is the misnomer that we're seeing quite a lot with businesses. They're going, oh, we've got a contract here. They're on 40,000. We don't need to keep records. You do. And it's catching so many people out because they don't have evidence for the past 6 years.
Proper rabbit hole, this one, Jenny, isn't it? I did some work with one of the providers on their audit functionality and trying to, I guess, get people who are non-payroll to understand the whole, I guess, allocation of hours against pay within the year, which could run out 3 months before the year is finished. And then obviously the intricacies and, I guess, problems and costs that can cause, even, as you say, with somebody not earning national minimum wage, is an incredibly complex area.
The main bit I see as a difficulty is that work category to start with. If HR are issuing the contracts out, HR should be saying, in my opinion, what work category they are, so that payroll have a fighting chance of following the right NMW calculation, because each of the work categories have a different calculation. So if you are under a salaried work category, then it isn't just the maths that most people think. We won't just look at the contract and go, Jenny's doing 40 hours a week for £50,000. She might do a few extra hours. We'll divide the total hours by the contracted pay. That isn't how the calculation works. It's a lot more technical than that. And it actually starts to become a risk when in the year you've worked all your contracted hours. So if you get someone at the end of their month 11, and I've done a few extra hours throughout the year. Month 11, I've achieved what my contract says of my 2,080 hours a year. In month 12, do I go home? I've done what I said in my contract. Well, we know we don't, because the contract said you may be required to do extra hours. And that then becomes an excess hours issue that's compressed into the last month of your calculation year. And that's where lots of people are being caught out on quite high salaries as well.
Mm. Perhaps we should all just have that month off. Perfect.
We go to the Austrian 13th month, I guess, where you get an extra money for nothing. Is that right?
Yeah. I think this could go on for quite some time. Should we get to the poll? Because I think this was an interesting one, wasn't it? So thank you, everyone. That was brilliant. So I think this was you posed this question, didn't you? Someone, I'm dropping you in it, but do 0 hour and low hour contracts have a future? And our answers are, well, our options are yes, maybe, no, don't know. I don't know if we don't know. But so if people want to vote on that one, what are our thoughts as a panel?
Yeah, because I'm thinking some years ago, I remember probably 10 years ago, there was kind of general predictions that we're all going to become gig economy employees, just allocated as and when people needed, with no sort of. And then, I mean, I'm going back to the Cameron Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition time, and then we had I've forgotten his name, the Liberal Democrat leader at the time, was it, or no, he's had been a leader later or before, can't remember which, that was then the business minister, who then started to bring in protections for 0 hours contractors, because at that time lots of 0 hours contractors were under agreements that they couldn't work for anybody else, and that became unlawful at that time. So that you can't have a 0 hours contract yet require the individual to be available just for you, exclusivity. They can work for anybody if they're on a 0 hours contract. That became the law at that time. But there's an element of, we're all going to be gig economy workers, and there's an element of, are we all gig economy workers? I don't think we are. And equally, that trend, is it disappearing or slowly going? But the government and the way government talk about it, and you could say that's a Labour language. It was language used by the Conservatives as well. They refer to it as one-sided flexibility. So that it's quite often portrayed that these are for the flexibility of the employee. I think they generally, and in many cases they may be, but generally the government statistics are being shown that they're not for the benefit of the worker, they're for the benefit of the engager.
That is precisely why the structure of the policy is the way that it is that the employer has the obligation. Therefore, if the worker enjoys that flexibility, they can decline that contract. Whereas if it was, on the worker to request it, as I think many businesses who enjoy the one-sided flexibility would have wanted it, it would potentially be, as a lot of sort of policies of that sort of ilk go, that not everyone will exercise their right because they either don't know about it, don't understand it, or are intimidated not to. Whereas this kind of flips that on its head and makes it an obligation that the employer should be offering that to the workers, and they can accept if they choose.
Polls split pretty even there.
Very split.
Yeah.
Yes. We've learned nothing.
Yeah, well, I think that shows how confusing it is, I think, Steve, at the moment.
I do. I think it, I was talking to software providers yesterday that are purely focused on gig in mainland Europe, but predominantly around like drivers and stuff like that, and building the software around that, which is pretty unique. But yeah, I do feel when this started, it was very much in the employer's favor, right? Didn't really hit.
And I guess the next question is, if we're looking at this as a gig model, does this then start raising the self-employment head up even more? The totally devil's advocate here. That argument has rolled on for what, 10 years? If we go all the way back to Addison Lee and those initial sort of scenarios that we had, does this turn, I guess, an employer's head towards offloading, if that makes sense? It's quite an interesting area.
Well, yeah, that then hits into minimum wage law implications, holiday pay rights, sickness, etc. Yeah. So you've got Pimlico plumbers, you've got all those sorts of things.
But it certainly must be making people a bit twitchy.
Wasn't the
especially gig?
Pimlico plumbers was the guy who said everyone should be in the office, and he did it in a news interview from his home in Marbella, where he was working from home.
Well, it was more the fact that they wore uniform, drove in vans with Pimlico plumbing written on the side, and had a contract. Those were the real killers.
Yeah, that one.
And were told what they were, and also they were told where to be, what they were doing, and how to do it. But other than that, they were completely self-employed.
Yeah.
They could choose their own shoes. I think it's about it.
No, maybe, as long as they were black.
As long as they had Pimlico plumbing written on.
It's the sort of quintessential status determination case, that one, isn't it?
Brilliant.
Yeah, well, that was it, Matthew. It reminded me of some status determinations where I've done consultations for clients for like inside, outside, IR35, and and you go through it all, and then it's like, yeah, but they need to be in the office at 9 o'clock on a Monday. It's like, well,
It was the same with the original Uber case, wasn't it? They were told which way to drive, even. So
yeah,
how can you have the argument that they're autonomous?
I mean, it's picked up loads in NMW investigations, the data side of it, whether they're actually workers. So they will explore that, and it's part of the first things they will ask for. If you get any, self-employed, they won't just be looking at it from the employee I-35 angle. It's the worker angle that you can often get caught out there as well.
Totally.
Okay, so we don't have much time, but we've got lots to do. I told you it was going to be busy, right? So salary sacrifice is the next. I think we have touched on this from other areas, but let's kick through onto that. We've got some big questions here, haven't we? Salary, does it have a future? The impact on payroll benefit, April 2029, and how? These are the practical implementation and stuff like that, I think we're talking about. So I don't know if someone wants to take a lead on these points and tick off what we have covered and what we haven't covered so far today.
Well, the reason for raising it is because of the government proposal in April 2029 to limit the salary sacrifice capabilities, or the tax relief and NI relief basis, to £2,000 per annum. How? Because that's a figure that neatly divides by 12 or 52. It doesn't. How that's going to be applied is subject to consultation. So, and those sorts of things are happening. I think I'm already aware of a couple of appointments that are coming up to explore how the thump are we going to do this. There are other aspects that may, and so it's interesting to hear others' views, because I don't think it stops the sacrifice. It changes the natures of the NI relief. That's an initial thought. So your NI relief on it is limited to 2,000, else it's subject to class 1. But if it's a salary sacrifice, you're still reducing NMW pay. Is that even if it's over £2,000? That's because NMW pay couldn't care less whether it's subject to class 1 or not. Whether it's before tax or after tax makes absolutely no difference. It's an element of, have you reduced contractual pay by the arrangement? If you have, you've reduced NMW pay. So it's that sort of thing. So there is an element of increasingly, with mandation of payrolling benefits in kind, is there a future for salary sacrifice? Will the government start extending that 2,000 limit? Will that 2,000 limit ever rise? Or is it 2,000 limit forever? So it becomes like the old days we used to have luncheon vouchers, which were, was it £1 a day or something, that ends up being forever 35p. And so it starts to get so small that it's just written out. I don't know. That's where I think our head was going on some of this discussion and view. I think it's still very popular, still a lot going into it. However, employers at minimum wage levels seem to be increasingly being pushed them. There are, I'm going to call them, some rogue players out there. So there are 1 or 2 organisations that are heavily pushing the benefits of salary sacrifice schemes as no-brainers, all perfectly approved by HMRC, where half the things they promote don't have any benefit. Never did. They're just a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of national insurance law. And they may have amended their schemes subsequently, but there's obviously big money in it for it. And if the inspection takes place in 3 years' time, I don't care, because I'm in Bermuda. Spending the fee I've charged you for doing it is a little bit of the fear. So sometimes I just have visions in some. I'm going to say a lot are very reputable. They'll tell you exactly what is allowed. They'll explain the rules, etc. But there are 1 or 2 players out there that are a little bit like the tax rebate agencies that have just jumped in. They've got a rebate of £1,100 for married couples allowance, and you never see it because they've run off with it.
There is quite a
That
big push
fair?
on Andy Burnham, isn't there? Has been over the last 24 hours to review this one quite
Yes.
dramatically, because the belief is that it's, you know, as we all understand, it's restricting people's want to put money into pension schemes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been on the cards for so long. I've had so many conversations over the past sort of 8 years or so on this particular one, but they really do not seem to want to be moving on this. They look at it from the other angle, and HMRC are just going, well, we're just enforcing it. The Department of Business and Trade are the ones telling us what the policy is, and they don't want to amend it.
But then also, is it a drive to take out this, you know, paying the bonus into the pension under a sacrifice model?
There's options to do that. I mean, it all impacts on
No, I'm saying,
NMW.
is this directed or a way of removing that? If you restrict the level of sacrifice on a pension contribution, because we see it a huge amount. You know, we've paid a bonus scheme. These 20 people are going to give up the right to that bonus for a sacrifice pension.
On the whole, those don't actually cause an impact when you're doing the NMW calculations, because it's just an extra bonus payment.
No,
Your base pay is still counting, doesn't it?
no, I'm looking at it more as people taking it as a form of tax evasion.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's where the
Well,
origins of salary sacrifice were, wasn't it? Is in the old bonus salary sacrifice back in the 70s, 80s sort of era. That's all where that started. Is don't take the bonus, have it paid into your pension.
Yeah.
Hey,
I think the sort of
sorry.
the bigger picture with salary sacrifice is that, you know, I say to people, say, can we salary sacrifice this? And I'm like, you can salary sacrifice absolutely anything you want to salary sacrifice. It doesn't matter what it is, but you do have to equalize the tax position after the fact if it's not something covered by OPRA. So you need to sort of understand that side of things. But the sort of longer term plans with salary sacrifice, as far as government and HMRC are concerned, I think, you know, that April 2029 we'll sort of watch this space and see how that evolves, but that might be sort of an indication of where we move further into the future.
Got a sort of a contradictory push coming in here, I think, because we've got the likes of certain TV presenters are saying you've got 2 years left of this, everyone do it, and then switch it off. So on the one hand, there's a plan of do people start to consider a wind down, and then suddenly there's a whole load of employers being pressured to wind in to then exit in 2 years. So it's just interesting times.
Yeah, I think it's the putting the head in the sand with many at the moment. They're just going, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But in the meantime, they're doing exactly what you say, Simon, and ploughing it all in just in case.
Then you can say that about pension legislation generally. It's not going to happen, like changing the age and removing. So, there's so many aspects of auto enrolment, for instance, that are rolling along in the background, shall we say.
Thank you, guys. I think next one's on to HMRC, but as we move through to that, a callback question to the last bit. I actually thought this as well. It's almost impossible to track the working hours for salaried staff, especially now that a lot of people are working from home. Can the panel give some suggestions on how this could be done?
Yeah, brain implant. I don't know.
Timesheets.
Why is it impossible to track it? If you are giving a contract out that says you will be doing 40 hours a week, you may be required to do extra. You'd be tracking them if they were underdoing it, so they're not providing the work. I think it's just a cultural thing with us, to be honest, maybe being a bit controversial there, that businesses and employees are just going, you don't have to track me, I'm salaried. There is ways of doing it. I mean, HMRC will do it. So if you as an employer can't prove the hours someone's worked, they will go and get the evidence from elsewhere. They'll take the digital footprint of the laptop. When did Jenny log in? When she'd log out? I might have gone to the gym halfway through the day. Highly unlikely, but you know, I might have gone and walked the dog. If you're not keeping a record of what someone's actually doing and you're just leaving them to it, that burden of proof is back on the employer to prove it. So HMRC will use their best judgment based on the evidence provided. The employer can't provide it. You're putting yourselves way at risk with it. The employee might have a really great diary. So when I was a compliance officer, we'd look at the diaries. That'd be part of the evidence. Oh yeah, I guess this time I do X, Y, and Z. They won a tribunal not so long ago on their best judgment because the employer couldn't provide those details. So just saying it's difficult to do it, I think it's a case of we've got to wake up to the reality of actually it's a risk and we need to find a way to do this and manage it. I don't think it has to be an expensive T&A system. I think there's other ways you can actually manage this within an organisation. Some people are running it alongside the well-being, making sure people aren't doing excess, maybe bringing in less, more robust toil policies rather than being managed locally. But there are ways around doing it. But in my opinion, yeah, it needs doing. And we'll link it in with Fair Work Agency and holiday pay and everything else. So it's all going to come into a head.
And I think, there are a number of, I guess, areas of leverage for an employer to be collecting the data, because there is a lot of health and safety aspects. An example could be Sue, who always comes in a bit late because she's got issues at home and stays later than everybody else, and she's the only person in the building. Okay, so if she perished the fall, fell down the stairs, nobody would even know about it. So there are so many aspects to why you should have that control and understanding of your staff, because as you said quite rightly, ironically, if they came in 10 minutes late every day, you'd have them in a room in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
well, the thing is, yeah, we used to keep it, Richard. I mean, I think going back in the days, even when I first started the bank, they used to operate flexi time. You'd want the flexi time records because you could then, another area of difficulty these days, go into your toil type aspect and have your flexi day leave, etc. So we were incentivized to kind of keep our time measured. But then we went into this probably 90s culture of being flexible generally. So there was no core time or flexi time. You got 35 hours, do the job in the time or whatever time it took. No overtime, things like that became the culture. And also we've gone into an era of, those that are still working at midnight will get the promotions, even though you're not being paid for it. And then we've gone into the other shock. So it's then reversed. So we had the Deutsche Bank case where they obviously weren't measuring anything in Spain, which caused European, but we left so before anything European applied to us in the UK. But this is kind of all matching or aligning with that sort of attitude. And then you see some other nations where, there's an element of, well, I've done my 35 hours, I've got to stop. Culturally, they've got it because that's what the law says and the employer understands it. And there's an element in the UK, we're just not there yet. But there's a question of, do we need to get there? Because is that where the law's going?
But I think as well,
some businesses are really getting the hang of that, Simon. So they're actually looking at putting blocks on new IT systems that are brought in and everything like that. So actually say your contracted hours are 9 to 5, you won't have access to it after 5 o'clock. We're not going to have that risk. Down. Yeah. So I've seen businesses building that in.
But I think also the modern culture of flexible working is making the challenge more. So you now get obviously companies where there is an expectation you come in the office for 3 of the 5 days. Your core working hours are 37.5, but your base core is between 10 and 2, and you work around it. So all of a sudden you're adding so many intricacies and so many nuances to the actual working week that it is very challenging. But
Steve must be having a panic. We've just completely gone off track, haven't we? But I think that'd be great to have a future of work. What is the future of work in the UK session sometime?
Massive session.
AI runs the world and we're all out of job.
Well, it's going to be really poor in the way it works at the minute.
Well, ironically, we had it, I think it was last month or the month before, we had the skills gap piece, but then we overrun, so we never covered it. And I think we might be at this point here because we had the HMRC piece, but there's still more questions coming through, which I think is great because that's the whole point. So And
Let's
and,
answer that
and also
question.
the passion and the depth of answers is brilliant. So the one here was, does a benefit like Gym Flex, which is not treated as salary sacrifice, instead only has NI relief, does this reduce the hourly rate for NMW and LW?
It's salary sacrifice.
Salary sacrifice, it's under that umbrella, if it will reduce it. If it's outside salary sacrifice and it's a business-owned gym, it'll still reduce it because it's for your own use and benefit. If it's a third-party gym, it won't.
It's the problem often with these things, Steve. Their names often disguise or call them something, whether smart, flex, exchange, they're all salary sacrifice arrangements.
There we go.
People will tell you they're not, they are, or if not, they're opera arrangements. So your NMW pay will be reduced first. Even if you give a flex allowance and spend it, the flex allowance is not spent, it's still there. You've spent their earnings for NMW purposes. Is that fair to say, Jenny? I think it is.
Yes, it's allowances not counted unless consolidated.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next up, I thought the cap was just on pension salary sacrifice. Is it on all salary sacrifice?
Yeah, it's total is pensions.
There we go. So we might get to HMRC. We are short on time. And I think it was more because there was a poll for HMRC as well. I think the panel felt, well, when there was discussion before, it was that is dispute charges, is it getting better? I don't know whether that's like time on the phone or the actual responses, and new POE creation issues, double digit app, employer online portal. So
It
it
may be good to carry this one.
Yeah,
when we've got,
in more depth,
no,
I thought, but we
in
could
September.
we could run the poll so we then get
could.
the sense of the crowd out there, what people feel, and then we can then loop back for September.
When we have absolutely no change to legislation, when we come back from the summer, we've got this to talk about.
So is HMRC getting better? Yes, definitely. About the same. And did someone from HMRC write this question? So I think it's a perfect one to end on today, guys.
Well, it depends whether it's positive or negative, whether they wrote it or not, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be brave, but I don't know. What's everyone's experience on the panel? Because obviously this has been brought up.
My personal view is I think it has improved. So the dispute charge case is where the account balance for an employer is out, and historically, if you go back 10 years, a resolution of that could take anything from 18 months to 3 years. My experience recently, but is it quick? The answer is no. My experience is now that the new online dispute charge case provision has been brought in. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get the data, and so resolution is much quicker. However, I still see a big reluctance of employers to raise the dispute. I think it's poorly named because it sounds like you're out for a fight, and you're not. You're just trying to correct something. But without seeing what HMRC have done with the data, you won't know. And the only way you can get that data is to raise a dispute charge case. Otherwise, you're just guessing. You're just looking like for a needle in a haystack. You don't know why they've duplicated. Go on, Matthew.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I'm really interested to see if we can hear from anyone who has gone through the new dispute resolution team, or charge resolution team, as it was called in the past. It's been a number of different names because, as Simon said, there was an element of it taking quite a long time to get a resolution in the past. But the new G form allows people to go directly to that resolution team rather than having to go through the employer helpline to then escalate it, to then get assigned to the charge resolution team. So if that process is working better for people, great, but we need to know people who've gone through that process to know if it is better.
Another note, when we're talking about general HMRC, we did do a small survey, and the view was it took as long as it always has to get through, but the answers are getting better, if that makes sense. So it's taking less calls to get the answer you want.
Well,
I think we could really dive into this for 45 minutes on another session.
I think we'll pick that one up hopefully in September. I think the poll feedback is pretty much that HMRC.
I'm really happy for those 2 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
One of them is
maybe it could have been a more nuanced question, as Simon just said. You know, it's like, you know, what, right, are they better at what, in what way, and what's your experience and what's your yardstick? How long have you been doing this, and when did you last do this one process? So we can do that and deep dive. I think we were asking for hot topics for further questions anyway, so I think we found them ourselves. And I think we're running out of time, and I think we've lost Jenny, who has been amazing.
Right.
So but what
Jenny
I would like
must
to
have
say,
had to run at 1:30.
yeah, I must say, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Don't forget to download the HR and Payroll Pulse survey. Really, really interesting report there. Just really to say thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you, Jenny, wherever you are. Been brilliant. And lots of stuff to pick up and take into September. We have that as the 16th of September. I've got that on the calendar. I'm not sure if it's the 16th or the 24th. I'll double check that. And we may be going live on that one. I'm not sure. We'll have to check out on that one. So
yeah, we got an audience and online with that one.
okay,
It would be like real question time, will we?
Well, we had 24th. I think it is the 16th because I've got that in my calendar, but we'll get this out to
Yes.
everyone. And just to say thank you again. Have a great summer, and we'll see you in September. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.